A big day for the G20, but above all for Indian diplomacy. A Delhi declaration has been adopted amid fears that no consensus would be reached. Those fears proved to be unfounded. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. In this special broadcast, we're looking at the G20 resolution. World leaders have reached a consensus, a resolution that the leaders have adopted and agreed on. In fact, G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant just minutes ago said that there are 83 paragraphs in this declaration and there is 100% consensus on each of the points made. The most polarizing issue, of course, was that of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. India has, of course, taken a very, very unique and its own position, our own position on this matter. But today, India and India's diplomats will take on the mantle of having played consensus builders, having managed to contain a reference to a demand, a need, a desire, and working towards what the declaration calls comprehensive, just, and durable peace in Ukraine. To talk about all that has happened, and remember, this was also a day when the African Union, under the presidency of India, was invited to become a member of the G20. Let's introduce our panel of experts today on the program. It has been a very, very interesting day. Veteran diplomat Ambassador Dilip Sinha is with us. Welcome to the program, sir. Also joining us from the United Kingdom today is strategic affairs expert and who's with, of course, the Global Policy Institute, Tobias Scholz. Welcome to the program, Tobias. And also joining us is another veteran diplomat, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. Thank you very much, all of you. And in the course of this special programming this evening, we'll have other experts join us as time goes along. Ambassador Sinha, I'm going to play out Amitabh Kant's statement in just a moment, but just first impressions. I'm sure you've managed to look at key points in that declaration, especially the reference to Russia and Ukraine, and we'll have snippets of that up on our graphics. Just your first thoughts.
Well, this is a great achievement. There was genuine fear being expressed all around that there would be no consensus, there would be no Delhi declaration, and the host country would have to be content with the chairman's summary, as had happened with all the other ministerial level meetings, including the foreign ministers, the finance ministers, the trade ministers, etc. So this is a great achievement, and there is no doubt that one has to compliment the participants, the Sherpas, and all the other ministers, the officials who must have put in burnt midnight oil to get consensus. And the other interesting thing about it is that it's been adopted a day before the conclusion of this a 2-day conference, and on the very first day it's been adopted. So obviously there was a report saying that this morning apparently India circulated a paragraph on Ukraine, and that seems to have been accepted. So when you look at the declaration on Ukraine, you find that both sides seem to have given ground. Both sides, the West and the China-Russia combined, did not want to embarrass India by holding on to the stance that they had taken in the ministerial meetings. So this is not only a happy occasion, I would also think it's a matter of great relief for India.
Is it more robust than you expected? We are, of course, looking at sort of the key points of that statement as it refers to Russia and Ukraine. Now, the statement calls for the cessation of military destruction and other attacks on relevant infrastructure. It talks about comprehensive, just, and durable peace in Ukraine. And most importantly, it repeats what the Prime Minister has said to Vladimir Putin. This is not the era of war. Today is not the era of war. Is this more robust than you expected, or is this along the lines that you would have thought the statement would go?
Well, this is the point of comparison would really be the Bali Declaration adopted in November last year, which was a very difficult negotiation. Now, if you compare it to the Bali Declaration, you find that there is a bit of a come down on both sides. Both sides have accepted a dilution of the language against them. In the Bali Declaration, there was the Russian invasion was deplored in the strongest terms. That sentence is missing in the Delhi Declaration. So that's a big come down for the West. At the same time, the very fact that this paragraph has been put in a consensus document means that both Russia and China have come down. They have also realized that they had to accept some kind of a reference to Ukraine. The other phrases, this is not a period of war, etc. All that essentially is a uh, drawback from the Bali Declaration. But both sides have compromised to make
So
the
the Russians have compromised, but also those attacking or criticizing the Russians have also compromised. So, to that extent, do you think this is a stronger statement or a more sort of watered down statement on Russia Ukraine since Bali? Because I asked you this, Ambassador Sinha, because Russia and China have also upped the ante since Bali.
Yes, that was quite clear in the various preparatory meetings at the ministerial level and the Sherpa level. As I said, none of the ministerial meetings could adopt a joint communique. They had to be content with the chairman's summary, whereas now a declaration has been adopted. So that is a come down by both Russia and China. But at the same time, the West has also allowed the language of the criticism of Russia to be diluted to make it a little more palatable to them. So it is a compromise by both sides. And I think the primary reason for this is that they did not want to see the Delhi Declaration to become the first, or Delhi as the first host of the G20 not to have a declaration.
Yeah, let me just play out what G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, obviously in a very, very good mood at that joint press conference, amid reports that there might not have been, as Ambassador Sinha said, a declaration at all, calling this actually the most ambitious G20 presidency ever, while sharing some details of this 37-page joint declaration, in other words, called the G20 Joint Declaration, the Delhi Declaration. Listen in.
When we
Okay, I think
started
we're waiting for that
India's
statement to come.
presidency, the Prime Minister had said that India's presidency must be inclusive, it must be decisive, it must be ambitious, and it must be action-oriented. The New Delhi Leaders' Declaration has 83 paras in all. All 83 paras have 100% consensus across all countries. There are 8 paras on the geopolitical issue, which is entitled Planet, People, Peace and Prosperity. All those 8 paras have 100% acceptance. All countries have unanimously supported the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. This is one declaration without a single footnote and without any chair's summary. This is a complete statement with 100% unanimity. This demonstrates both the Prime Minister's and India's great ability to bring all developing countries, all emerging markets, all developed countries, China, Russia, everybody together on the same table and bring consensus. Secondly, this has been the most ambitious presidency in G20's history ever, because the number of outcomes it has, both the outcomes and the annexed documents, are about 112, which is more than 2.5 times which has ever been achieved before. Thirdly, this presidency, if you go through the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, it has a huge India narrative.
A huge India narrative, and I'm welcoming General Kulkarni to the program. Good evening, sir. Dr. Mohan Kumar, if I'd like to bring you in to add to what Ambassador Sinha just said. Obviously, a big win for Indian diplomacy. India will now, I think, be entitled to position itself as a consensus builder, a balancing power, as it were. Is that how you see it? Is the statement everything you expected, less, more? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think that's a fair description in terms of how India feels and how, more importantly, other countries look at India. But I have to say that Bali was an aberration and a bit of a miracle, frankly, for China and Russia to accept to condemn Russia. That's what they did at Bali. So everyone agrees that it was one of those things, and I don't know how a veteran diplomat like Sergei Lavrov allowed this to pass. But something happened in Bali, and my conversations with diplomats makes me believe that it was an aberration. This, I think, is a wordsmith at work, and I somehow suspect E.M. Jaishankar at work. What they've done is to go back to the original age-old principle in diplomacy that you put in language by which Lavrov can go and tell Putin, I saved your face. The Prime Minister of China will go and say, you need to give me a promotion to Xi, and in which case, of course, there is only Xi's post he can fill. And others, like the Western leaders, can say, okay, I think we got our way. I think the dilemma for India was the Western leaders wouldn't accept a Delhi declaration without mentioning Ukraine. China, Russia said G20 is not a geopolitical forum. Why are you including Ukraine? I think, in the context of these well entrenched positions, I think a typical IFS wordsmith has done his job.
I'm smiling because a British friend who's actually in government and is here with the delegation. I obviously can't name him. He said, "This is Indian. This is perfect Indian jalebi diplomacy." You're calling it wordsmithery, but isn't that the craft of diplomacy, sir? Isn't that the
Well,
craft?
no, no, of course, of course. And I'm beginning to wonder why people didn't do this earlier. Look, I think very early on it was obvious to people that you cannot resolve this conflict. Nobody has been able to resolve this conflict. Lula has tried his hand, Saudis have tried their hand, South Africans have tried their hand. So, how do you get a declaration which will resolve the conflict? That is pretty stupid for people to expect. This is the best that could have been done. And I think it's a master stroke. You have to give it to the External Affairs Minister and his team, including the Sherpa. And considering the Sherpas, I'm told, presented an empty paragraph for geopolitical content. That's why I'm giving the credit to the External Affairs Minister. But the rest of the declaration is substantive. And I wish to talk about that when you give me an opportunity. But on this particular issue, I agree with my colleague Dilip Sinha. I think it's a come down because the Western countries got what they wanted in Bali. They put Russia on the mat. They rubbed Russia's nose in the ground. And I think we've come back to normal. When you have an intractable problem in diplomacy, you try to solve it through words. I think that is what has been done with great effect by India. But kudos to India. It's fantastic. Dilip and I have been in meetings where you stop the clock at midnight tomorrow and then you make people work. This is the exact opposite of what I've seen in WTO. You don't stop the clock, but now you allow the leaders to go to Taj and do other things tomorrow. They have nothing to do. So it's quite remarkable. From that
Yeah.
perspective, it is remarkable.
Yes, I'm just amused at the thought that, we're all used to as reporters covering diplomatic conclaves where the joint statement goes down to the wire and the I's are being dotted and the T's are being crossed just before printing. So this is quite unusual to that extent, Ambassador Sinha, isn't it? I'm sorry, General Kulkarni and Tobias, I'm coming to you in a moment. Just want to get the diplomat's perspective here. It's a big day for Indian diplomacy. Ambassador Sinha?
Yes, it is. It's a great achievement and also extremely good in terms of timing. In fact, very unusual, as Mohan said, it is very unusual for a conference which was presumed to have been so tense. And in the run-up to it, there were so many difficulties. And yet, it seems to have come up with a very successful outcome within 1 day. It's like a 5-day test match ending in 3 days.
And not because of rain.
Not because of rain, exactly. And both sides
Yeah.
were kind of batting reasonably well. It was a tricky pitch, all right, but
Yes.
the fact remains that yes, the delegates here. I think it's important here to note that perhaps India is the flavor of the day in the world today, and both sides are still wooing in India. China and Russia do not want to lose India, and the West also doesn't want to. So this is one of the periods in our history when we can actually set up and say, yes, we are very proud of what we have achieved, what our diplomats have achieved. And the outcome for the world also is extremely good because it really brings forth, as I think as Mohan will explain very much better, greater detail, what the South's agenda, as well as the need for cooperation between the North and the South, and the East and the West. So it's a great declaration and a wonderful achievement.
I'm going to play out the man you're both kind of crediting, the Foreign Affairs Minister Jaishankar, in a moment. I just want to welcome Tara Karta, Strategic Affairs Analyst, who's with us. Get first comments from the three speakers who haven't spoken yet. Let me actually start with you, Tobias, if I may. What's the view from the West? I think Rishi Sunak, for instance, when he came here, he said, "We're here to speak for Ukraine," right? And at that time, and this was just yesterday, there was still talk that there won't be a declaration. That how could you, by definition, get a declaration with Russia and China being so aggressive, with Xi Jinping actually skipping the meet, with Putin skipping the meet? I mean, how could there be a declaration? And yet here it is. It may not go as far as the West would like, but it certainly goes further than many people had thought could happen, given India's own position, a position that has subtly shifted, but is certainly not the Western position on Russia, Ukraine. Tobias? Can we unmute him, please? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess if we look at the headlines of the last 2 weeks before the G20 summit, we saw that India was often compared with a bridge builder in the international system, and as a country that really wants to build bridges between different countries, between opposing sides of the world. And I think India has mastered this quite successfully with the summit. And in this function, Western countries are probably very happy with the result of India kind of providing them a way out of the impasse of current international deadlocks. I think beyond that kind of solution that India offers here, leaders of Western countries will go home and will be asked very tough questions by their populations, by their oppositions, because definitely the question or the demands that were asked towards governments of Western countries were, we want at least a statement that reiterates the demands of the Bali summit, and we want to have a tough line on Russia's war in Ukraine, and this did not happen. So this gives a very mixed picture. On the one hand, Western countries see India as a reliable partner, India as a strategic partner. It becomes more relevant, and it also builds up its diplomatic capacities. On the other hand, there's still kind of challenges in figuring out on how to cooperate with India on some of these broader strategic interests.
Yeah, you're right that the leaders will be asked questions by their traveling press corps that are also used to sort of more freewheeling access to their leaders. And they've been, at least the American entourage has been demanding answers to what exactly is going on. I can see General Dua here. Welcome to the program. Let me actually play out now Foreign Minister Jaishankar's comments, and then we'll get comments from General Dua, General Kulkarni, and Tara Karta. Let's listen in.
We have pointed out is a declaration of 83 paragraphs. It has a lot of content. There are a lot of subjects which have been covered, some of which we have spoken about. But obviously, because of the ongoing conflict, the strong views about it, considerable time was spent, especially in the last few days, in regard to geopolitical issues, which really centered around the war in Ukraine. The question who helped, I mean, eventually everybody helped because everybody came together for the consensus. But I think if Sherpa would bear me out, I think the emerging markets took a particular lead on this, and many of us have a strong history of working together. Bear in mind that actually you have 4 developing countries in succession as G20 presidency: Indonesia, us, Brazil, and South Africa. So, but I would say, rather than who helped, the point to be recognized is that a common landing point was ultimately fashioned out. On the Black Sea grain corridor, there are many discussions going on. As you know, the foreign minister of Russia is here.
the president of Turkey and his delegation are here. UN Secretary General is here. Other people are here. So it's natural that there would be discussions going on this. In the past, I should add, when the Green Corridor was created at Bali last year, we had also, in our own way, contributed to some bridging of viewpoints and concerns, both between at that time between Turkey and Russia, and also worked with the UN Secretary General. On the sentence, or that phrase about having different viewpoints and assessments, I think we are being transparent. I mean, it is a fact. This is today a very polarizing issue. There are multiple views on this. There are a spectrum of views on this. So I think in all fairness, it was only right to record what was the reality in the meeting rooms, and I think that is the sense that is sought to be captured.
Now, before I come to the generals and to Tarakarta, I just want the diplomats to come in briefly. Just to go back to Bali, Ambassador Sinha, you said that there was a dilution from both sides, the Russia-Chinese side and the Western side. But, I just pulled out the language of that. And, as you said, there was a reference to aggression, deploring aggression, I think it was, by Russia. In this joint statement, the reference is, of course, to just and durable peace in Ukraine, but it says the war in Ukraine, not the war against Ukraine, not an invasion of Ukraine. And that, of course, has been in some ways the Indian position. Do you believe there's an India imprint to that extent on this statement? Do you believe India has played a key role? That's my question for both the diplomats. Ambassador Sinha, you first.
I think quite clearly we have played a very important role in the drafting of this text. But I think equally one has to give credit to the Prime Minister for having spoken to President Putin a few days ago. That must have been a very important conversation, because he called up President Putin and spoke to him, and that would have perhaps set the stage that although Foreign Minister Lavrov took a very strong stand saying that the G7 was pressurizing India and all the other strong statements that they had made, but when it came to the crunch, he accepted even this language. And as I said, he accepted the reference to Ukraine, whereas the West diluted the language that was there from Bali. So there was a come down from both sides.
And Dr. Mohan Kumar, I'd ask you the same question. That come down, how much of that has to do with India? Because that is the position India will take for itself today. We are the bridge.
Look, my assessment is the Bali language was an aberration. And in any other country, Sergei Lavrov would have lost his job, because you're walking out of a summit in which the language says, I'm condemning Russia for committing aggression against Ukraine. Come on. I mean, so there was something which was going on. Nobody's able to explain why Russia accepted that language. But I think it became clear over the last several meetings that both Russia and China will not accept Bali language. Bali language was dead and buried. I think the genius of Indian diplomacy and wordsmith, as I said, is to come up with language de novo. This language is not something you will find in any other declaration before this, where they have reiterated UN resolutions, UN Security Council resolutions, and said countries reiterated their national position, allowing elbow room for Lavrov to go back and tell Putin, listen, I think our position is protected, Chinese position is protected, and the Western countries have achieved an important objective of just inscribing a para on Ukraine in a G20 declaration, which is primarily geo-economic. It's not geopolitical. So I think all sides have something in it. And to that extent, you have to give absolute full credit to Indian diplomacy, without a doubt.
Absolutely, you give somebody something to everybody to go back home with, and I think that's the India imprint. And to that extent, it is worth considering, General Dua, that there had been so much pressure, so much criticism in the Western media in particular about India not taking a stand on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. With this consensus building statement, as both our diplomats have said, do you think that narrative will shift? Or do you think, let me ask more directly, that India is shifting the global narrative on Russia, Ukraine? Or will it be, as Tobias Scholl said, that when these leaders go home, they'll all have to face tough questions? General Dua.
Um, I think India has taken a very pragmatic stand on the issue. I mean, given the circumstances, given the fact that a consensus building was a requirement of the moment, given the fact that India has actually made a very inclusive sort of a summit, and in many ways, and we are not discussing that. Your question to me is very specific about the Russia-Ukraine war. I think India has taken a very pragmatic stand. India has managed to get a consensus on a very tricky statement, as has just been discussed by the diplomats very well in this panel. And I think all in all, we could go back home very satisfied on this issue amongst all others.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we should speak about to General Kulkarni and Tarakarta and the others is this very, very important Indian, Middle East, Europe connectivity. The reason I bring this up, I mean, Russia, Ukraine is the headline that the world's media will be looking at. But, shouldn't we be also talking about this as a possible counter to China's move, China's One Belt, One Road initiative? General Kulkarni?
Thank you, Barkha. At the very outset, I must first say that one of the finest moments for the Prime Minister of India, it couldn't have been better. I think it was just a fantastic moment, primarily because what India was all along portraying as a Vishnu Guru, I think Mr. Modi has proved as the real Vishwamitra. And the way he brought everybody, and the words used are also similar, and in a very subtle manner, it conveys it to our adversary what they need not do. So I think it's one of the finest hours for India, one of the finest moments, and one of the fantastic declarations that have been made. Having said that, the Belt and Road Initiative part, which the Chinese seem to have got into trouble because tremendous amount of investment has been done by China, but the returns aren't there. And it has almost led to countries into debt, as a result of which Chinese have been sort of dilly-dallying it, and she has rather gone on the back foot, with even people in China questioning his decision. And in that context, when we are attempting to make something parallel, similar, better, I'm sure our system of connectivity in the world, what we've been wanting to always been saying about one Earth, one family, one future, one connectivity, we talk of one sun, one world, one grid, all of it. I think the system with the BRI started off by China more like a predator rather than some of an investment for which the others would be helping off. So that, in that context, I see China on the back foot, because Chinese have lost out on not only the investments, but also on the image and what they thought that they were being seen as someone friendlier to the developing nations. That hasn't happened. And the African Union, even the representative, the way he hugged the Prime Minister, and he was virtually saying thank you for all the efforts that you made, enable African Union to become a member, and which is now it's become G21. So I think in the overall context, it's been a win-win situation, one of the finest moments for India, one of the finest moments in the world at a time when Ukraine crisis seemed to be, and even the Sherpa himself was hesitant till yesterday, but Sherpa has succeeded.
Sir, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt you because the Prime Minister is speaking live, and I do need to go across to this, because this is the Prime Minister at the India, Middle East, Europe economics corridor that we were just talking about. If we can briefly listen in and have the sound up on this, please.
हार्दिक स्वागत है। मेरे मित्र राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के साथ इस इवेंट को को-चेयर करते हुए मुझे हार्दिक खुशी हो रही है। आज हम सब ने एक महत्वपूर्ण और ऐतिहासिक समझौता संपन्न होते हुए देखा है। आने वाले समय में यह भारत, पश्चिम एशिया और यूरोप के बीच इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन का प्रभावी माध्यम होगा। यह पूरे विश्व में कनेक्टिविटी और विकास को सस्टेनेबल दिशा प्रदान करेगा। मैं हिज एक्सेलेंसी राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, हिज रॉयल हाइनेस क्राउन प्रिंस एंड प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोहम्मद बिन सलमान, हिज रॉयल हाइनेस राष्ट्रपति शेख मोहम्मद बिन जायद, हिज एक्सेलेंसी राष्ट्रपति मैक्रो, हिज एक्सेलेंसी चांसलर सोल्च, हर एक्सेलेंसी प्रधानमंत्री मेलोनी और हर एक्सेलेंसी प्रेसिडेंट वॉन डेर लेयन।
Let me get the Prime Minister there inaugurating that connectivity corridor that we were talking about. Tara, if you want to just come in with the importance of this, we were just talking about this as a potential counter to the China's, One Belt, One Road initiative. Do go ahead, Tara Karta.
Barkha, this is a triple whammy. I mean, this is amazing, right? That first day, first show kind of thing. You got the African Union in, then you have this corridor, and now you have the declaration. I mean, it can't get better than this, right?
It's like the Shah Rukh Khan moment of Indian diplomacy, huh? First day, first show.
Absolutely. All you need is the waving going on. But in this, I mean, I am actually quite astonished at the mildness of the language. It is in the declaration. It's like, guys, don't do this kind of stuff. It's extremely mild. Having said that, I mean, given full 100% credit, not just to the foreign minister, also to the NSA, please. The NSA was involved in all of these things and working very quietly behind the scenes. But also, please remember, if we were to compare this to the February 23, I mean, when the second year started, the UN declaration, which was harsh language, if you remember that was just in Feb. 32 abstentions. The number of abstentions on Russia has been going up steadily. So people are quite fed up with this whole thing. The whole global south is saying enough is enough. That is one. Number two is just a hint. Yesterday or day before, I think China announced that they're banning Apple phones in Beijing. And the whole the share market of Apple has crashed. So this is the kind of power which China has. I'm just putting that on the table. These are. Then you had the UN, the UK, James Cleverly in Beijing, not a great meeting. You had Gina Raimondo in Beijing, not a great meeting. There are lots of things at work which is bringing, the economy is taking such a beating that a lot of countries are beginning to realize that, look, it's time we sort of maybe not a step back, but sort of be a little more realistic about the whole thing. And this, I think, given with full kudos to our hard work, we managed to bring that together because, like the ambassador said, 3 developing countries. There's Brazil, there's India, all.
And I'm so sorry, I'm having to interrupt you because the American President Joe Biden is speaking live. Also, I'm just going to have to dip in and dip out. If we can, do we need a couple of minutes to set that up? Tobias, can we squeeze in a comment from you in the meantime? Tobias, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess this new partnership could really be a game changer because it shows that India, together with the United States, together with European countries and Middle Eastern countries, is creative, is innovative to think about new solutions.
Sorry, I'm going to, you're going to all have to forgive me because there's so much news coming at us every minute. I'm going to cut across to President Biden.
Gaps across low and middle income countries. We need to maximize the impact of our investments. That's why a few months ago, I announced that the United States will work with our partners to invest in economic corridors. In practice, it means we're focusing on regional infrastructure projects that deliver results across multiple countries and in multiple sectors. And today, I'm proud to announce that we've finalized a historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across 2 continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet, contributing to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East. And I want to thank the sponsors. And I particularly want to thank Prime Minister Modi and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and President von der Leyen and the European Commissions. And since he's not speaking today, I wanted to, maybe he is speaking today. I had a note he wasn't speaking. At any rate, I'm going to stop there. In the sub-Saharan Africa, we're working in a private-public partnership as well to invest in a trans-African corridor. That includes a new partner, the European Union. President von der Leyen, thank you for making this very possible. Together, as part of this corridor, we're going to invest in a new rail line that will extend from the western port in Angola to the DRC, to Zambia, and ultimately the Indian Ocean. It's a project that's about far from just laying tracks. It's about creating jobs, increasing trade, strengthening supply chains, boosting connectivity, laying foundations that will strengthen commerce and food security for people across multiple countries. This is a game-changing regional investment, and both of these are huge, huge steps forward, but they're far from the only ones. We're continuing to make big investments in infrastructure around the world. That includes a solar energy site, an insulin manufacturing facility, and electricity project right here in India. We're continuing to develop economic corridors across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And together with our partners, we're working to mobilize the trillions of investment needed to close infrastructure gaps around the world, including the formation of a new investor forum that the United States will host in a couple of weeks. Let me close with this. The world stands at an inflection point in history.
Do we have the sound up? All right, there's President Biden. I actually wanted to hear his closing. Can we have the sound up?
And ever. So together, let's continue to work as one to seize this moment in history and maximize our collective investments, to find new partners, to unlock new capital. Because when we invest in low and middle income countries, all countries benefit. When we invest in emerging economies, all economies benefit. And when we invest in the future of people anywhere, people everywhere benefit. So I want to thank you again for being here. I look forward to working with all of you, and I'm going to turn it back to the Prime Minister.
All right, that is the American president, Joe Biden, at that big sort of new economic connectivity corridor. I want reactions to that. Tara Karta called it a triple whammy. Let me start there, and then I'll go around the panel for maybe final comments. Tara, it's back to you.
Yeah, see, it's no doubt it's a kind of very late response, if you ask me. However, whatever it is to the whole, the China, BRI, blah, blah, all the rest of it. This is the side we're going through. And I can be pretty sure that India at least is going to push for it 100%. This government is about the economy. That is their primary focus. It is about pushing the economy forward. So they'll go forward. I'm just wondering, just a thought. I was wondering how this will affect the international INSTC, the International North-South Corridor, whether this will have an effect on that. Will that be prioritized less? The grain shipment just came in to Iran from Russia. Hopefully both will prosper. We don't know. But this is great. This is a fantastic move. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, let me bring in Dr. Mohan Kumar. Go ahead. More has happened than Russia, Ukraine in that declaration, as Tara was pointing out. Dr. Kumar?
No, I think it's remarkable what these guys have done. I would say that they've ticked all the boxes. I thought they would leave one or two boxes unticked. One was Ukraine. The other is taking advantage of the presence of these leaders to do what the Prime Minister has done with Joe Biden yesterday on some of the defense deals, and today in this grouping with you, with Gulf and with the EU, and then with Saudi Arabia and others. I think they've also ticked some of the important bilateral aspects of what India really is looking for in terms of infrastructure, in terms of trade, etc. So all in all, I would say remarkable. I don't want to spend too much time because you've got other guests, but some of the things that this declaration has done, I think
Give me yours, even. Sorry, even some of the things.
No, I said some of the things that the declaration does, even Amitabh Kant, despite his tendency to exaggerate at times, he is spot on today because the outcomes have been very specific, frankly. If you look at the high principle, the Deccan high principles for agriculture, the principles for life, the principles for a biofuel alliance, the principles for green hydrogen. So the devil is in the details, Barkha, frankly. One has to pour through the document. But I think on the whole, nothing has been left to chance. And I think it is an absolutely remarkable achievement by the Indian presidency.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. Let me get General Dua in. What for you is the standout moment of today? General Dua?
I think to give one standout moment would be an oversimplification of an answer. I mean, there are so many things. I think the day started off with inclusion of African Union in such a rapid speed. We all knew that it will happen, but no one expected that it will happen right there. He moved into the chair. We spoke about the Russia-Ukraine war, but or the inclusion of, I mean, the inclusivity, the biofuel alliance. But this, to me, is essentially an economic grouping, G20, now G21, perhaps. And this corridor that we're talking about, India, Middle East, European corridor that President Biden just spoke about, I think this is one of the great game changers. We perhaps do not expect this to come about, and this has actually been worked out in a very short time frame. And I think this is going to be a great moment for the economic surge as G20 is meant to be.
And also countering China, General Kulkarni, last thoughts.
One liner which I can say that Sherpa and his team have succeeded in putting Bharat scale Everest. I think that could be better. It's fantastic. It's just like scaling Everest. And that is what the feeling today is. And I think they've done a wonderful job. We could be asking for more. Thank you, Barkha.
That's a good one-liner, sharp and succinct. Tobias, this is all from the prism of many Indians and many Indian diplomats and military veterans. You're not Indian. You're looking at this from the outside. What does it look like to you?
Yeah, let me just add some points about what I expect, kind of like about the future, because we're almost kind of past this summit now, and I guess the hard work probably really begins now because there are 84 or 85 paragraphs involved in this declaration, and we see that with Brazil and South Africa being the next hosts of the G20, we now have a summit declaration that covers a lot of ground, that covers a lot of topics, but it will be up to the next years to see whether all of these points can be implemented. Another important thing, I guess, is, and that's also interesting about the timing, we saw 2 hours ago that the declaration was released, and now after the declaration text is released, countries come together to form a geoeconomic anti-China group, which also adds a bit skepticism towards, or leads me to thinking, how much will the G20 become a stage in the future for different geoeconomic platforms to compete with each other, and how much will states actually continue to cooperate if they know that states are now also increasingly try to pose counter projects geoeconomically.
That's a very interesting question. And I want to give the last word to Ambassador Sinha. We had somebody on our program yesterday, another military veteran, colleague of General Dua's and General Kulkarni, General Shukla, who said, listen, Xi Jinping isn't here. Let's take full advantage of a sulking China. Now, you have not been convinced that Xi Jinping isn't here because he's sulking, because he's beleaguered at home. either way, Tobias raises a very interesting point. What's happening right now with this connectivity corridor? The Europeans have also announced a connectivity project for Africa. This entire sort of coming together of the Americans, the Europeans, the Middle Easterns, the Indians, this is an anti-China move. And Tobias raises the very interesting question about the future of the G20 as an economic sort of conclave, if it is going to be in the end of a kind of reordering, a restructuring of the world order, whether through the global South's inclusion today or whether in the form of the counter-China moves. Ambassador Sinha, last word to you.
Well, while the Delhi Declaration and the Delhi Summit are a great success, a resounding success of Indian diplomacy, the global realities cannot be ignored. The fact is that the world is extremely divided today, and that will impact the G20. Now we have to see how Russia and China look at the G20 in the coming months, perhaps coming months, I would think, and how well they participate, if at all, in the various initiatives that have come forward today. So the G20 is certainly not in good health. It came up at a time when the world was prepared to come together to meet the global crises, but today the world is not so. We have achieved a great success today. It's a great relief that we got a declaration, but tomorrow will be another day.
That's right. Diplomacy is always a work in progress. But honestly, I have never seen such a smooth unveiling. Well, we don't know how hard the negotiations were behind the scenes. As we have seen with this joint declaration, I think who was saying, I think you were saying the delegates have actually been freed up to actually spend a night out in Delhi on Saturday evening, should they so choose, which is quite remarkable. Thank you very much, Tarakarta, Tobias, Scholz, to General Kulkarni and General Dua, Ambassador Sinha, and earlier to Dr. Mohan Kumar. Thank you very much for joining us. Our special coverage is continuing. In fact, I am told that we'll be cutting across to more live programming. But first, if you've just joined us, it's a big day for Indian diplomacy. There is a Delhi declaration. The G20 Sherpa announced it just a while ago. Let's listen in to what Amitabh Kant had to say about what he called the most ambitious G20 presidency ever. Listen in.
When we started India's presidency, the Prime Minister had said that India's presidency must be inclusive, it must be decisive, it must be ambitious, and it must be action-oriented. The New Delhi Leaders' Declaration has 83 paras in all. All 83 paras have 100% consensus across all countries. There are 8 paras on the geopolitical issue, which is entitled Planet, People, Peace and Prosperity. All those 8 paras have 100% acceptance. All countries have unanimously supported the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. This is one declaration without a single footnote and without any chair's summary. This is a complete statement with 100% unanimity. This demonstrates both the Prime Minister's and India's great ability to bring all developing countries, all emerging markets, all developed countries, China, Russia, everybody together on the same table and bring consensus. Secondly, this has been the most ambitious presidency in G20's history ever, because the number of outcomes it has, both the outcomes and the annexed documents, are about 112, which is more than 2.5 times which has ever been achieved before. Thirdly, this presidency, if you go through the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, it has a huge India narrative.
Good evening and welcome back to our special programming. Not that we ever stop. For those of you who are just tuning, oops, we're having a bit of a technical problem there. For those of you who are just tuning in, this has been a big day, a big win for Indian diplomacy, a declaration that many thought, some pundits thought would elude us, that those fears turned out to be unfounded. And in fact, not just has there been a Delhi declaration calling for durable peace in Ukraine and underlining that this is not the era of war, we've also seen the African Union being formally invited to be part of the G20. And the third big headline today is, of course, the economic connectivity transport corridor. We saw President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, Middle Eastern leaders, the Europeans, all coming together in a move that clearly is designed to be countering China's One Belt, One Road initiative. Now, lots to play out here. Let me start with Foreign Minister Jaishankar explaining what went down in getting everybody to agree on that Delhi declaration.
You have pointed out is a declaration of 83 paragraphs. It has a lot of content. There are a lot of subjects which have been covered, some of which we have spoken about. But obviously, because of the ongoing conflict, the strong views about it, considerable time was spent, especially in the last few days, in regard to geopolitical issues, which really centered around the war in Ukraine. The question who helped, I mean, eventually everybody helped because everybody came together for the consensus. But I think if Sherpa would bear me out, I think the emerging markets took a particular lead on this. And, many of us have a strong history of working together. Bear in mind that actually you have 4 developing countries in succession as G20 presidency: Indonesia, us, Brazil, and South Africa. So, but I would say, rather than who helped, the point to be recognized is that a common landing point was ultimately fashioned out. On the Black Sea grain corridor, there are many discussions going on. As you know, the foreign minister of Russia is here. The president of Turkey and his delegation are here. UN Secretary General is here. Other people are here. So it's natural that there would be discussions going on this. In the past, I should add, when the Green Corridor was created at Bali last year, we had also, in our own way, contributed to some bridging of viewpoints and concerns, both at that time between Turkey and Russia, and also worked with the UN Secretary General. On the sentence, or that phrase about having different viewpoints and assessments, I think we are being transparent. I mean, it is a fact. This is today a very polarizing issue. There are multiple views on this. There are a spectrum of views on this. So I think, in all fairness, it was only right to record what was the reality in the meeting rooms, and I think that is the sense that is sought to be captured.
All right, let me introduce our guest today as we decode this very, very newsy day for strategic affairs and for global diplomacy, and for India really claiming its position as a bridge builder, a consensus builder, not only delivering a Delhi declaration, but also inviting on its watch as the president of the G20, the African Union, to be a permanent member of the grouping, and ending the day with a connectivity economic corridor that is clearly designed to counter China's One Belt, One Road initiative. I want to introduce our guests on the program today. First up is General Yadav, General Rameshwar Yadav. Welcome to the program, sir. Also joining us today is senior journalist from the United Kingdom, Nicholas Nugent. Welcome back, Nicholas. Also joining us is Padma Rao, one of the country's best known and senior-most journalists on the foreign affairs beat. And also joining us, welcoming back to the program, is Professor Harsh Pant, who's a strategic affairs analyst with the Observer Research Foundation. Harsh, I want to start with you. 2 days ago, you and I were talking, and you said India has finally begun to irritate China, and that's a good thing. And now we have actually a joint statement that refers to durable peace in Ukraine. Yes, it's watered down from the Bali declaration, which actually spoke of Russian aggression. It says war in Ukraine, not war against Ukraine, but it's still much more robust, I think, than the pundits had expected. What is your take? What's your standout moment from that Delhi declaration?
Barkha, I think at times perhaps we in India underestimate our ability to make things work. If you recall, I don't know how many do at this point, but Bali had specific references from reservations from China and Russia that were recorded. This time, those explicit, reservations are not recorded. It's a joint consensus document which lays out the positions, watered down from that perhaps. But I think articulating and mixing up the issues that India was saying from the very beginning, that the war has an impact on the developmental agenda in the world. And given that G20 is the locus point of the developmental discourse in the world, we need to look at that issue through that lens. And I think that's what clinched the deal at the end. When you say that, look, war is there and war is having an impact in various parts of the world and particularly impacting the underdeveloped world, the developing world, I think you create a space for consensus of this kind to emerge. If you would have started from a position where you would have accepted that, look, there are these positions are there and geopolitics is going to intrude and therefore give up. I think throughout the ministerial tracks, and a lot of the ministerial tracks did not have the consensus document. But I think from the experience from that was leveraged at this point. And I think an attempt was made to bring various stakeholders together and to articulate their reservations in a way that perhaps allowed us to generate this kind of a document. So whether it is the Chinese or the Russians, they may have reservations on certain counts. But I think no one at this point is willing to antagonize the developing world. And as Jaishankar also said, look, this is the emerging markets took the lead. They were framing the agenda from the word go. And I think that perhaps has been the big story of this summit, that we have not given the space to big powers. We have ceded that space, taken that space and pushed our agenda forward.
Yeah, and to that extent, before I go to the others, Harsh, would you say that the Indians at one point, India was under so much pressure from the West on for our position on Russia. Admittedly, our position has also been shifting in a subtle way. We have calibrated our position, but to that extent, do you believe that this declaration actually pushes back against the Western reductionist sort of tropes on Russia, Ukraine? Or do you believe that this has given everybody something to go home with, which is really the art of fine diplomacy?
I think everyone will go home and play to their audiences differently.
Yes.
But certainly from India's vantage point, if you look what India has been saying from the very beginning, all of those issues are there. Territorial integrity and sovereignty, the idea of international law and multilateral organizations playing a role, the idea that this has to be linked through this has to be viewed through the developmental lens. I think all those ideas are there, and I think if you amalgamate all those ideas, you come to a document where perhaps everyone is relatively happy and will go to their domestic audiences and play to their domestic audiences in their own ways. But I certainly think that from the very beginning, India had pushed back against a certain kind of a narrative that, as you said, was reductionist to begin with, that there are huge issues in a large part of the world that we are not talking about, and that if a platform like G20 is not talking about those issues, it's a waste of time and waste of energy. And I think that's what India's message to the G20 summit has been.
Okay, let me just for a moment, because in a way, despite variations, I kind of know what Indians are feeling today. Let me bring in Nick first. Nick, Rishi Sunak is going to travel back to the United Kingdom, and I think the Indian diplomats are fairly confident that the declaration has a little bit for everyone to carry home. It does call for durable peace in Ukraine. It does talk about a cessation of military attacks on relevant infrastructure, which is not spelled out, and it does say very unequivocally that this is not the era of war. However, it doesn't use language like aggression, invasion, war against Ukraine, and so on. What do you think will be the reception in the British media to this kind of language around Russia and Ukraine? Nicholas?
Well, let's start by saying that the expectation that the G20 was going to solve the Russia-Ukraine crisis wasn't there, was low, you could say. We didn't send our prime minister to India to try to negotiate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. But of course, he was bound to raise it. So I have to say I'm a little unimpressed by the deal. All it's telling us is that we can continue to talk about other matters. We had to deal with this first. It's been dealt with first, and full credit to India for coming up with a statement that seems to satisfy everybody. But ending the war in Ukraine is no closer now than it was yesterday. It's still a big problem, not just for Britain, but for Europe and indeed the world. What I would hope is that now we can proceed to talk about the things that the G20 is meant to be about, where there's much more consensus, I think. Climate change, economic issues, which really is what it's about. So having overcome this barrier, this first hurdle, yes, we've got everybody talking, but it's not going to resolve the issue of war in Europe.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to what comes next, really.
Fair enough, but let me pick up on that and get Padma and General Yadav. I'll come to you right after that. Russia-Ukraine is not perhaps the most important issue for the global South or for India, and that is the point, right? From Nicholas's perch, that's what the UK, the USA are looking at. From India's perch, they've actually got, with Russia and China in the room, a declaration that everybody, according to Amitabh Kant, has agreed to. And that in itself is a big deal, given that till yesterday we were saying there may not be a declaration.
Absolutely, Barkha. I can empathize with what Nicholas said, that, that from the point of view of Britain, it may look different. Now, I'll just speak very briefly from the Indian point of view, because for India, the big economic issues are, of course, of great concern to us. But Ukraine, Russia, as you said, has never really been our primary concern. The real issue for India, if we are looking at geopolitical issues on the fringes of the G20, lies along 3,500 kilometers of the line of actual control to China. Now, let me be very honest. So from that point of view, the biggest takeaways of the Delhi Declaration from the point of view of India individually, but also of the global South, are the inclusion of the 55 countries of the African Union. The AU is a big bloc, and for India, this means both votes in international gremiums, as well as, especially in the United Nations. And for the global South, it simply means representation and balance of power shifting. The commitment to low-cost financing for developing countries, both for low carbon emissions as well as for developmental growth. For India, this means that all those countries that are part of China's BRI, or many of them, will now get funding elsewhere, and they in turn will be relieved of this debt trap diplomacy which has been choking them. Debt vulnerability, the same thing, the commitment to debt. Then the use of threat of the statement which they made on touching upon Ukraine. Now, it may not have contained any direct criticism of Moscow, and as I said yesterday on your show, that was to be expected, that there would be a watered down language. But it is a win for Delhi, because the Western countries ultimately did water down the wording that they had originally demanded. So it just goes to show that the global South is, of increasing importance,
Absolutely.
as you said. Finally, just one last point, the declaration also reminded people to refrain from threat or use of force, to seek territorial acquisition. Now, I think from the Indian point of view, it's a very clear reference to the kind of Chinese attempts at acquisition that we are seeing on our immediate border. Barkha.
Yeah. I think that's the last point, is a very important point about territorial integrity. It was said in the context of Russia, Ukraine, but it obviously applies to the new China map. It applies to what we're dealing with, the Indians are dealing with, we are dealing with in Eastern Ladakh. General Yadav, our army is eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese in Eastern Ladakh. And I think Padma is very right in underlining that. And to that extent, while there was consensus up until the Delhi Declaration, what happened after that, this new connectivity corridor, and I will play out what President Biden said in just a moment, that is really important, because it is a clear counter to the BRI project of the Chinese. You have the Italians poised to exit that project, so that is also really important. So there's something going on here. And somebody, I think from England, in fact, said on a previous program, so will the G20 then remain this conclave in this shape and form, or will the Chinese start seeing it as a sort of anti-Chinese geopolitical forum? General Yadav, go ahead.
Barkha, I've always considered that any project that you want to lay out beyond your sovereign territory, you don't have any control. This is what has happened to BRI. Now, BRI are the road and whatever infrastructure China is making. There are different countries, and each country, they have a pro-China and anti-China lobbies among the politicians. And moreover, all these poor countries, their biggest attraction is very easy loans with very minimal preconditions for its allotment, credibility, and other things. Wherein at the same time, from the time they took that loan, they knew it, they can't repay it. And this is what is happening in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, and everywhere else. And this is what Italy has realized. And sure enough, they have decided to come out of BRI. And now,
Yeah.
next month, there is a conference which is going to be headed by Xi Jinping. Around 90 countries are likely to come there. I'm sure there is a lot of friction in the BRI, the terms and conditions, and the way it is progressing. And I'm very sure that with the new initiative, what has been declared now, a new port and railway connectivity to UAE, then Saudi Arab, then right going on
Yeah.
to Israel, and further on to the Eastern Europe and Europe mainland. It is going to be a means a very good issue, because otherwise China thought that they are the only one who are interested and they are capable of doing this kind of a thing. So it is an alternate to the BRI. It is good for the country, for the world.
And I just want to play. Well, I wanted to actually play what President Biden actually said when he was talking about this alternative connectivity corridor. If we can just listen in to President Biden just moments ago, this is very important and very interesting. Just waiting for it to play.
I want to.
Yeah. Give it a second.
Of this G20 Summit, and in many ways, it's also the focus of this partnership that we're talking about today. Building sustainable, resilient infrastructure.
Sorry, I think we're having a technical glitch playing out that statement from President Biden. We'll play it out just as soon as we have it. But do go ahead in the meantime, General Yadav, to complete your point.
Yeah, my point was, as far as the US is concerned, they are trying to create a counter to China. It is quite clear. It is a geopolitical point, and they're supporting India and all other countries with whom they have good equation. And where they find this complete energy corridor and their own markets, they want to serve that. So it is, well, it is a part of the geopolitics, and I'm also of a view that this world has got adequate resources and infrastructure for everybody to grow and everybody to exploit what are the resources Earth has got. And in fact, this conference was all about this. You see, it was a summit with a difference. There was a very good motto given by our Prime Minister, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thereby, they are trying to say that galvanize the green initiative, promote the inclusive growth, economic growth, and synergize technology for the future generation. Very good theme and very well cut out. And that was the reason everybody fell in line and everybody supported our Prime Minister and the Indian initiatives. And that's how you see such a nice declaration that satisfies everybody. And it has included by and large everything. And one
Okay,
more
I'm
point
told.
I want to...
Sorry, sir. I'm interrupting you because I'm told that the statement from President Biden is now ready for us to listen to. So just briefly, let's just dip into that statement and we'll get reactions.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. One Earth, one family, one future. That's the focus of this G20 Summit. And in many ways, it's also the focus of this partnership that we're talking about today. Building sustainable, resilient infrastructure, making quality infrastructure investments, and creating a better future. A future that presents greater opportunity, dignity, and prosperity for everyone. Last year, we came together as one to commit to this vision. And this afternoon, I want to highlight the key ways in which the United States and our partners are working to make this a reality. Economic corridors. You're going to hear that phrase more than once, I expect, over the next decade. Economic corridors. As we work to address infrastructure gaps across low and middle income countries, we need to maximize the impact of our investments. That's why a few months ago, I announced that the United States will work with our partners to invest in economic corridors. In practice, it means we're focusing on regional infrastructure projects that deliver results across multiple countries and in multiple sectors. And today I'm proud to announce that we've finalized the historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across 2 continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet, contributing to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East. And I want to thank the sponsors. And I particularly want to thank Prime Minister Modi and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman.
So that's the big announcement from President Biden. And Professor Harsh Pant, I want to bring you on it. Everybody's focused on Russia, Ukraine. What did the declaration say? Is this almost a bigger deal? Harsh?
Essentially, this is a much bigger deal, Barkha. I think this, if this can be operationalized, this changes the way we would look at our strategic geographies and the way we connect with them. Because ultimately, the whole drive behind China's so-called rise has been that it was able to articulate a vacuum in the global economic order, and that was the deficit of connectivity. And once China announced BRI, it was almost the announcement of China's coming of age as a partner that can be depended upon. Now, as that has started unraveling, I think a lot of the low and middle income countries are asking, where are the alternatives? Where do we go for alternatives? And I think what India has done relatively interestingly is to say that, look, we are in no position to match China dollar for dollar, but we are in a position to build partnerships with like-minded countries. So our partnerships are our way of entering other nations and perhaps the hearts of other nationalities, because that is our way of doing business. We are not looking at it block-wise. We are looking at it in terms of partnerships. We are looking at it as a bottom-up approach to developmental agenda. And I think this is very well synced in with the larger G20 agenda, which talked about connectivity, which talks about inclusive economic growth, and which talks about balancing globalization. Again, an important point that I think has been part of India's G20 agenda, that globalization perhaps is not dead, but we need to revive faith in globalization by making it more inclusive, by making it more diverse, and by bringing in the developing and low-income countries into the mix. And I think this can really change the dynamic if it is operationalized and if everyone...
What do you think the Chinese are feeling about it? They're still here. The Chinese premier is in town.
Well, I think, in some ways, China is, look, if China had created an alternative or given as an alternative paradigm where it were to be more inclusive, where India and other countries would felt inclusive, felt part of it, where it was not challenging the territorial integrity of other nations, I think a lot of this would be uncontroversial, right? Who doesn't want infrastructure, connectivity, economic partnerships? Yes. But ultimately, if you go into this project with a unilateral instinct, I think that creates a problem. And I think India has provided a good antidote to this. And I think that's what is very interesting about a lot of the other partnerships as well. Not simply this, but also when we are talking of with Japan, with ASEAN. Prime Minister presented a 12-point agenda in the ASEAN summit, which was also about connectivity. So I think connectivity and India's role in building bridges with various geographies is going to be a very important part of India's economic diplomacy going forward.
Right. And of course, you have the Italian Prime Minister also commenting on this. And as I said, that the Italians are poised to withdraw from the BRI project. And she said today is the launch of a new economic corridor between India and the Middle East and Europe. And this is a milestone. And I just want to bring in Nicholas to wonder whether you might be somewhat more taken by this development than you were with what you thought was a very mild Russia-Ukraine reference. Nicholas?
Most definitely, yes, because I see this as much more forward-looking, much more relevant to what I think the G20 is about or should be about. But I was intrigued by your question to the previous speaker. Is China going to be upset by this? Because you do make it sound a bit like a competition, and I suppose it is a competition.
Isn't it? Isn't it? It is a competition.
It's a competition for influence through aid, in a way. because as far as the Western, well, as far as the big powers are concerned, it's about giving aid to generate.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't think that's how India would see it. But I just wanted to say that on record and then let you complete your point. Do go ahead, Nicholas.
No,
yes.
I accept your qualification there. Perhaps I shouldn't be using the word aid, but it is, let's just stick with communication, which is what the word Mr. Biden used. It is to some extent a competition, and it goes back to what the G20 is about. Whether whether the G20 is in competition with the G7 or with the BRICS, what do these multilateral operations stand for? Is it a question of pulling a new one out of a hat, a new trick, which that one looks to me a little. You can tell that I'm very cynical of all these things, but if they deliver, then there's no reason to be cynical. It's just that words are the starting point, and then you've got to take it off. And it's true that the BRI seems to be going through a tough patch, and perhaps China can't sustain it. So it is the moment for someone else to come up with a new initiative. So most definitely I am interested in that. I'm interested in what the Chinese say about that. And to go back to an issue that you haven't raised, but why Xi Jinping is not there at all, whether that's because he's upset with India, as some people are saying, or upset with America, as I'm inclined to believe, or entirely for domestic reasons, which is another valid point of view. Yeah. I'm interested to see whether Xi Jinping goes to the next multilateral event, the APEC in San Francisco, because I think that really will be the telling point. If he doesn't go to that, then it's either about America or it's because China's dipping.
Well, Harsh, who I was just speaking to, had said previously on my program that he thought Xi Jinping wasn't here because India had finally begun to irritate China, and he said that's a good thing. So I think in this room, so to speak, everybody is going to say, yes, it is a competition. The world knows it's a competition. India is the favorite of the season for many reasons, and one of them, let me say something cynical to you, is because India is seen as a countervailing force against China. But Padma, I'm sure you can pick it up better than me. Padma, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say to Nicholas, this is not aid. This is about partnership, investment, and equal opportunity. Now, India, I might remind you that India turned down aid from the United Kingdom, so to speak, several years ago. But the UK has insisted on keeping it up, sending aid just under different names and guises. But that's not the main point here. The point I'm trying to make is that three very brief points, Barkha, if I may. One is that if anyone sees a dichotomy between India being in organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and now the G20, because there's China involved. I see especially G20, and I see this whole move as a tactical move, as a safety backup and a win-win for India. Whether the one organization works or stagnates like SAARC did in the past, this forum, the G20, is just too big. And now, by virtue of sheer numbers, with the joining of the African Union, has become extremely powerful and represents more of a power balance in terms of economy. Second, the fact that Brazil, South Africa will host the next few summits. This is again a very comfortable vantage point for the entire global South, more so now after G20 has become G21. Now, to your point, Barkha, on reductionist trope, there is, I would agree with you, but there are many analysts in the West who have themselves begun to see Ukraine, Russia in a slightly different light. The sands are shifting, though nobody will say so upfront. Very last point I'd like to make is all this binding. We have a Delhi declaration, but declarations have come and gone. I think the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. So also the strength of any declaration will ultimately lie in the execution. I mean, this India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, two things about it. One is that even trade agreements with the European Union are still hanging in balance, hanging in the air, for instance. They have not been firmed up. They've been dangling for years, So unless those are sorted out, also, what is the trade going to consist of? What is the trade-off rather going to be? What is India going to be required to do? Is India going to be required to participate more actively in Indo-Pacific forums like Quad? There has to be a quid pro quo for everything. And I'm really speaking purely in bilateral terms when it comes to this trade-off.
That is a very interesting question.
And to the Chinese... sorry. And to what the Chinese are calling this, I just read an article that one of its think tanks has called the G20 India's big plan with a small mindset, and has laid the blame squarely at India's feet for the fact that she didn't come. Xi Jinping didn't come. So,
yes.
Barkha.
Well, the mystery of Xi Jinping, there have been many theories. We discussed that yesterday. Today, I think the headlines have overtaken the Chinese absence. But one thing to talk about, General Rameshwar Yadav, let me bring you in, that the Chinese tried very hard to push the United States out from their role as host country in 2026. So there is competition, not just between India and China in Asia, but there's definitely a US-China a sort of clash there, or a West versus East clash there, where China is the antagonist. General Yadav, what for you is the standout moment of today? General Yadav?
A standout moment, as I look at it, what our Prime Minister has given out in one sentence. He very simply said, the war has created the trust deficit. It is in reference to the war. But when you say war, I take it is a war not only in the physical sense, it is a trade war also. And then he goes about and he says that we jointly we can resolve all our differences, like we had defeated the COVID. And not only that, it is not only simple sermon that he has given a solution. Solution is, we say sabka sath, sabka vikas, and sabka prayas. That means everybody has to jointly do it, and he has tried this experiment within the country, which is equally applicable outside in the field of the warfare and also in the trade war that we have. This world has got ample resources, I always say, so that everybody can survive, everybody can utilize those resources. But China, the way the China is, they want to have everything to themselves. They want to pursue the unilateral policies. And unfortunately, whatever Xi Jinping, all his policies are failing because they do not have the logic and the rationale the way it should be in the present day context. They are still on the wrong side of history. They use the military to conduct their foreign affairs. That is not done now. That was 200 years ago is fine, but not in the present day environment.
All right, it's time to close. I'll give Professor Harsh Pant a brief closing word. Somebody earlier today was saying there were three big moments: the African Union, the declaration, and of course the economic corridor. Which one would you pick as your headline of the day, Harsh?
I would still go with the economic corridor, just for the fact that its impact, if it gets going from the ground, would be so huge that I think we will have to revise our definition of what our strategic periphery lies, because it connects us in ways to Europe and Middle East that we have not thought about. So it's very innovative. It's driven by ambition, and I think underlying all this, Barkha, today that we saw, is a certain ambition in India, that we want to deliver, we want to do more, we want to be out there.
Can I interrupt you briefly, because Padma referred to what the Chinese think tanks are saying, and one of the top Chinese think tanks, actually the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, that's the one that Padma Rao was referring to. It actually said India's attempt to mint itself as the new leader of emerging economies doesn't sit well with Beijing. So I just wanted to flag that. Go ahead, Harsh.
I mean. See, and India doesn't care whether it sits well with Beijing or not. That's not the point of Indian foreign policy. India is playing its own hand. Whatever it is given, we are playing with that. We knew from the very beginning that it's going to be very difficult to get a consensus, and we have reached today a point where we could deliver a consensus with all the obstruction that perhaps China could deliver throughout the process. So I think what India is trying to do is find its own place in the global order. And I think this exercise of G20 Summit, when it started, we were all making fun of it. We all said, well, what is it about? There's too much shosha happening. But I think at the end of it, there is that you can look at it as an exercise where India was having two sets of conversations. India was having a conversation with itself about what kind of a world power we want to be, what kind of a world leader we want to be. And India was also having a conversation with the rest of the world, telling them that we are here to deliver on certain counts. We may not be perfect. We may not have all the answers, but as I think General said, together with the rest of the world, together with our partnerships, together with the limited resources that we have, we are willing to pool in and we are willing to create a new world order. And I think that's very important. We are also witnessing the rise of a new global order.
Well, absolutely. And with respect to Nicholas, I think, and to the Foreign Affairs Minister who said on record that G20 is not the forum to solve geopolitical differences, I think those geopolitical undercurrents are very evidently there, whether in the room or on the sidelines. And in fact, officials told the Financial Times that China's stance had surprised diplomats. This is the FT just reporting this, talking about the myriad divisions between the two superpowers. The Chinese arguments against the US were not G20 related issues. So the fact is, realpolitik tells you that any such meeting of the world's top leaders cannot come without politics. And the Americans are responding and saying that the reference to the United States as the host of 2026 is part of the declaration. The Chinese, by the way, tried hard to get that out. Nicholas, that was just also for you, because there's competition happening at myriad levels. And when there's so much global power in one room, how can geopolitics and even politics be far behind? Thank you very much, Padma, Harsh, General Yadav, Nicholas Nugent. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you for watching. See you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.